two middle-aged women are walking out, and one of them says to the other, well, the music was good. And I went, we're dead. We're dead.
Well, there's some heat in this book. You can feel it on the page.
We could talk about this this is like a class. When I decided I have to write my story, I thought the only way out of this is through.
Hi, I'm John Karp. I am the CEO of Simon Schuster, but more importantly, I am the co-editor with Maria Mendez of this book, Theater Kid by Jeffrey Seller. And Jeffrey has changed the face of musical theater. He is the only producer in Broadway history to have mounted two Pulitzer Prize-winning musicals, Rent and Hamilton. And it is my pleasure to have you here today, Jeffrey. Welcome to The Right Reasons.
Good afternoon, John. It's really fun to be here today.
So let's start with a basic question. Where is the Cardboard Village and what is it?
It's south of 9, east of Coolidge. And for the many listeners or readers who remember Eminem's movie 8 Mile, Eminem lived at 8 Mile and Cardboard Village is just south of 9 Mile. So I lived in between 8 Mile and 9 Mile, just off Coolidge. And that's Oak Park, Michigan, which was considered one of the first suburbs just north of Detroit.
Now, when this project was submitted to us in October of 2023, that was the original title of this book, Cardboard Village. And why did you choose that as the original title, and why did you change it to Theater Kid?
I flinch a little because the term Cardboard Village always constricted me inside. It was a word that was the manifestation of all of my shame. That my family became so poor, we had to move from our nice house in the nicer neighborhood to what the kids called Cardboard Village, because the houses were constructed of the tar shingles that we normally see on the roof. And they didn't have basements, and they had carports instead of garages, and they were little 800 square foot slabs, on a piece of cement. And anytime someone said, "Do you live in the village?" I would flinch because I was so ashamed I'd be found out. And when I decided I have to write my story, I thought the only way out of this is through. So it's the first two words of the book, because I thought I just have to start with my shame. And that's why I thought it's also a good metaphor, not created by me, but that's why I decided at that moment to call it Cardboard Village. It was a good editor at Simon & Schuster named John Karp who said, I have two questions for you about your book. One, why aren't you calling it Theater Kid? And just to put that in perspective, Theater Kid was the basis of the pitch.
Yes.
Right? It was not a title of the book, and it was not a chapter heading of the book, but it was the thesis of the pitch. And as soon as you said that, my first reaction was, well, someone else has written a book called Theater Kid. And of course, I immediately went to Google and I Googled in Theater Kid. Nothing. I couldn't believe it. It reminds me of the moment when Lin-Manuel decides, oh my God, I want to make a hip hop musical out of Hamilton. And he literally Googles because he's sure someone else has already done it. And of course, that was not the case either. But how lucky were we that Theater Kid became the title of the book, because it became the perfect title of the book.
It seems to me from reading the book that being a theater kid in a way saved you. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I don't know how. I mean, I know that I enjoyed watching the Purim plays when I was like in second and third grade. And I know that I enjoyed them enough. I also remember thinking, how did they learn all those lines? It just seemed amazing that these kids on stage could know what line to say when. And when I was in fourth grade, I asked my dad if he'd take me to the auditions after they announced one Sunday morning that auditions were the following Saturday at the Temple in Detroit. And my dad gave me the one sentence answer that really became the theme of my childhood, which was get in the car. And when I went to the audition, I always enjoyed reading out loud in class. I would always hope the teacher would call on me. But I didn't know yet you have to read with feeling. I just know you read clearly and loudly. So I didn't get a part, but I was in the chorus. And that year, the Purim play, which is the story of Queen Esther, an Old Testament Jewish queen who saves the Jews at the hands of the murderous, sadistic tyrant Haman. It's kind of like our Christmas pageant play at Temple. That year, they mashed up three things. The Old Testament story of Queen Esther, South Pacific, and HMS Pinafore by Gilbert and Sullivan. So my first play was this amalgamation of Rodgers and Hammerstein, Gilbert and Sullivan, and the Old Testament, which we know to be very fertile territory for Broadway musicals. And I loved it. And I was filled with a sense of purpose for the first time in my life. Oh, this is what you do. And the day after that one Sunday morning performance at Temple Israel Religious School, I sat at my fourth grade desk in Mrs. York's class, and I wrote a little play called Adventureland. And my two best friends, Bruce and Jay, were characters along with me. And in this play, we fall through the roof of our shed and go to a faraway place where we encounter all kinds of life-threatening challenges, obstacles, and adventures, and then are ultimately saved by Peter Pan, who flies us home.
I guess one of the things that this makes me wonder is whether there is just something about being a theater kid that gives kids that kind of direction. And I'm just wondering, why you think it is that this form speaks to kids in such a personal way.
The process of making a show requires so much rigor, so much discipline, so much hard work, hours, and collaboration, that I think that the experience of it prepares us for anything we want to do in life. If you want to be a CEO, it will prepare you. If you want to be the head of cardiology at a hospital, it will prepare you. If you want to go be a sergeant in the Army, it will prepare you. If you want to go be the captain of a soccer team. When I was a camp counselor teaching theater to 14-year-olds, I can remember once, I'm with my campers. We get to rehearse our play about 3 hours a day. And as the session is advancing, I feel like I need more time. And they want to take a day away from me because that's the all camp sports day. And I go to the director and I say, can my kids be excused? I need to rehearse this. I can't lose them. And he says yes. But then all the other counselors in our village revolt. And they're like, no, Jeffrey, the kids need to do the sports day. You're hurting the cohesion of the village. I'll never forget that sentence. And I felt like I was going to cry. And I screamed, in 25 years, not one of these kids is going to remember anything about waterfront or sports day or any of that other stuff. But these kids in the play, they're going to remember this for the rest of their lives.
I think that's true.
Oh, I think it's true, and I think I was right.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the gestation of this book, and I'd like to contrast it with the gestation of the musicals that you've worked on. Now, I will just go back and give you my experience of this, because what I read was a mostly complete manuscript. I was on a plane coming back from Frankfurt, Germany, and your agent David Kuhn had sent it to me. And I really began reading it mostly just because I was curious about you. I had a full plate. I wasn't really looking to sign up a book, but I thought, well, I love Rent was for me, it was one of the two greatest experiences of my life in a theater. And I was very amused to read in Theater Kid, actually, that the other electrifying experience was also one of yours, which was seeing Jennifer Holliday in Dreamgirls.
You bet.
And we both had the same experience of And I Am Telling You I'm Not Going. But Rent was for me, when they sang La Vie Bohème, I thought that is what it means. That is what it feels like to be young and artistic and creative. And it spoke to me in a way that no other musical had ever spoken to me. And so anyway, when the submission came, I thought, well, I got to read this. And I was reading it mostly for my own interest in Rent. I had no intention of ever publishing the book, but it was so damn good that I came to the Simon and Schuster editorial meeting. I said, well, listen, there's this memoir that I read on the plane, and if anybody here liked Rent or Hamilton and wants to read it, and Maria Mendez read it, and she loved it too. But after we met, I realized that this was not just something you had dashed off, and I think you'd been working on it for quite a while. So could you just talk a little bit about the gestation?
Yes. I guess I started writing when I wrote Adventureland in the 4th grade. And then I remember, I wrote a little screenplay in the 7th grade, but then I really stopped writing because I was now in plays, and I was producing the plays at school, and I was, doing all of those other tasks. So I've always been a writer, but I, of course, was not a professional writer. I was a producer. And when I was first in New York, I did take a couple of fiction writing classes at the New School.
I did not know that.
And one of the stories in this book, the camping story, I wrote 30 years ago.
Wow.
I wrote that story for a fiction writing class taught by a novelist of some renown named Sidney Offutt.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a tough teacher, and he would say, you submit to me the work. And then he would come in and say, I will choose what to read, and I will read it out loud. He didn't have the students read their own work. He would read it. And the week after I had written this story about going on this camping trip with my father that was somewhat traumatic, he read that story out loud. And I didn't know if I wanted to run out of the room, fall into a hole. I didn't know where he was going with this. And ultimately, he said that he was taken by the shame this boy feels toward his father, but at the same time, the father's incredible love for his son. And he said it must feel so painful as a kid to be ashamed of the person who loves you so much.
Wow.
And that was his observation. And I just hung on to that story. I knew I needed to do something more with it, but I just held it. And not many kids come from a place like Cardboard Village and go on to produce Rent and Hamilton. So I knew that my story was unlikely. And I knew that my story began with shame, as we talked about. So I wanted to write it for all the theater kids who, in any way, shape, or form, feel out.
And that story that you wrote 30 years ago, I assume it's been revised. I mean, this is not the same exact version, right?
It has been improved.
Really?
But
okay.
I have to tell you, Jonathan, it's the story. I mean, it's the one I wrote 30 years ago.
Right.
If we counted up the words, it would be 80% the same as the one I wrote 30 years ago. And then there was some people said to me, how did you remember all this stuff? And part of me was like, well, because I wrote it when I was 30. I wrote it a long time ago. And when you're 30, your ability to remember when you were 10 is so much more powerful than it is when you're 50. So I wrote that story 30 years ago. There's at least one other story in there about my parents' divorce and all that stuff in college that I also wrote a long time ago. And I just needed to write this book for me. I did not write it with any expectation that it would ever be published.
But it was already at a very high level of quality by the time it got to us. And I remember asking you how you had been able to do that, because it had a perspective and it had that feeling of somebody who had not just lived, but had actually really made sense of his life. And I think you told me at the time that, you know, you'd been working on it for several years, and that you'd shown the manuscript to several trusted friends, and that this was not something that you just dashed off.
No, I wanted to write a book for many years, principally because I'm an atheist. So therefore, my existential dilemma has to be worked out within, because I don't have a God to help me or to provide that sense of why am I here. So I felt like I have to write it. And of course, I'm an atheist. I'm a Jew. I'm a gay kid. I'm a poor kid. I had a lot to work out. And I had a lot of fear. I didn't know how to do it. I was like, how do you connect A to B to C to D? And it was through my dear friend Ari Shavit, the great Israeli journalist and author of My Promised Land, which is a history book of the history of Israel, but it's also a memoir. And I had such enormous respect for him, and he became my first coach. So when I had the first 50 pages, I showed it to him. And then he gave me criticism. And then when I had another 50 pages, I showed it to a journalist I'd become friendly with named Michael Sokolov of the New York Times. And then he gave me an even more incisive sense of direction if I wanted to write a book. He's like, you have to, I remember what he said very clearly. He said, your lens is too focused. You've got to pull out. I remember so clearly him saying, you're a good writer, but you're too far in. You've got to pull the lens out. And both of those coaches provided an enormous gift to me in their instruction.
How does it compare to the musicals you've worked on? The amount of time it took you to write this book?
Similar. I mean, leaving aside the couple stories I wrote 30 years ago, it took about 5 years. Like all of us who have day jobs, my day job was being a producer. I'd have to figure out, when can I write? And sometimes I would just go away and go write for 3 days at a time. I'm not the type of guy who can wake up and just write for an hour in the morning. Like, I need to actually clear the day so I can clear my head. And but I do have the discipline to sometimes just say, I'm going to go away for 3 days and I'm going to write for 3 hours in the morning, or I'm going to do like 4 90-minute sessions. And after every 90-minute session, I'll give myself a half hour. So I started doing that, and I told almost nobody, because I really didn't know that it would be published. I didn't have any, like I said, I didn't know if the world would need or want this book. But I thought, I got to write it down for me. And, I never told my mother, who sadly died last year. And at the moment in which she became ill, it was too much to tell her about a book and work through that process. So I wrote it almost as an existential need for myself. And I thought, and if others come along later, that'll be great.
Well, that's probably true of a lot of theater that gets written too, where the playwright is writing it for themselves first, and then they're thinking about the audience later. Do you think?
Oh my gosh, I think, I have to say, I've never produced a show in which, or I've never produced a successful show in which I was guiding the author through their idea. All my successful shows were the authors working out their idea. And just like my book took about 5 years, it usually takes about 5 years. If you think about Rent, Jonathan gets the idea for Rent, around 1991. It opens in 96. It's 5 years later.
It's also true, though, that Jonathan had other ideas before then. In fact, you gave him the title Tick, Tick, Boom.
Yes.
And before Tick, Tick, Boom, he was thinking of doing some kind of a one-man show, right, where he was going to play all
Tick,
the
Tick,
parts?
Boom was going to be a
Okay.
one-man show. Yeah. I mean, he had already done, now made famous by Andrew Garfield in the movie Tick, Tick, Boom. He had done this musical called Suburbia. And they did a big workshop at Playwrights Horizons. And when the workshop was over, nobody was interested in producing it. And when he called his agent, she said, "I'm sorry, it's talented." And he's like, "That's it?" And she said, "Pick up your pencil, write another show."
Yeah, it's a hard business. I mean, do you think that being a writer has helped you be a producer?
Oh, I think so. I've been thinking about this through the process of working on the book, which is that A, I was a writer. B, I became the head of the play reading committee. And that was, of course, what I say was my first transitional moment. That was the moment where I made my first leap into producing. When I raised my hand in 8th grade and said, "Who picks the play?" Because I think we could pick better plays. And Mrs. Janney, a parental advisor for my youth theater group, said, "Well, that's the play reading committee, and you could be on the committee." Now, within a year, I was the only person on the committee, because how many 14-year-olds want to sit around reading plays all weekend? Well, guess what? That's what I wanted to do. And I think reading all of these children's plays when I was in 8th and 9th grade prepared me to be a producer and to learn how to talk to playwrights about their plays.
And why don't you elaborate a little bit about how you talk to playwrights about their plays? Because one of the things that comes through, certainly in your relationship with them, with Lin-Manuel Miranda on Hamilton, was that you were very gentle.
I might have been less gentle with Jonathan.
Right.
I think in retrospect. When I produce a play, my play is like my child. I've taken it on because it has moved me in my insides and my guts in some sort of a profound way that is all about feeling. And once I take on that child, my job is to nurture it. And what do? We know when to cheerlead. We know when to compliment. We know when to praise. And we have to figure out, when do we suggest? When do we recommend? When do we criticize? And I so powerfully remember sitting at this burger joint on the Upper West Side with Jonathan called Diane's Burgers. Mm-hmm. You might remember it. It was on Columbus. It's like I have this memory for all these streets. You were asking where Cardboard Village is. So Diane's was, of course, on Columbus in between 71 and 72. And Jonathan and I show up, and we're sitting at one of those tables where people carve their names into the wood. And he's like, "Okay, well, tell me what you think of Rent," because I just seen the first reading.
Yeah, this was quite dramatic in the book. I could feel you choosing your words. I could feel your own compassion for him.
And I thought, this could end our friendship right here. Like, he could say, "Screw you," and walk out. So what do we learn as parents? Start with a compliment. Tell them what's good. Give them encouragement. And then you work your way toward the criticism. So after I gave him some encouragement, I had to say, "But," and here comes the but, "I can't follow your characters. I'm not connecting with them. And I have no idea what the plot is."
Mm-hmm.
And that ultimately led to me saying, "Do you want to write a collage of the East Village? Or do you want to write a book musical with a beginning, middle, and an end?" And he's like, "Of course I want to write a book musical." I said, "Well, then you've got to go do it, because right now I can't follow it."
And he was hurt for a minute. You saw it in his face, right?
Oh, absolutely. You see the ears turn red. You see the slight crumble. And I don't really remember, nor do I write about, because I don't remember exactly how the evening ends, except for him like being indignant. Like, of course I want to write a musical. So he went back to work. He picked himself up.
And with Lin-Manuel Miranda, it seemed as if one of the best things you did for him was just to give him a place to write.
Yeah, I mean, In the Heights, his first show was so unique because he had already done a one-act version of it as a sophomore at Wesleyan College in Connecticut. And then a couple years later, he begins his fantastic collaboration with Thomas Kail, who becomes his chief collaborator and director. And then they bring more friends aboard, and then they eventually do their first reading of In the Heights, which grows from a sophomore project to a full-length musical in which along the way come Kevin and I as producers with our friend Jill Furman and Kara Hodes, the book writer. And it just grows and grows through enormous trial and error.
All right, well, I would like to read you a passage from your book because this was for me. This is about Hamilton, and it was so epiphanous when I read it that I shared with all my publishing colleagues because I think that it has a really original insight into the phenomenon of marketing and Hamilton in particular. So
I'm eager to
here's
find
what you
out.
wrote.
Yeah.
Here's what you wrote. So this was after you first stage it. You write, "The engagement at the Public Theater was sold out before our first preview. Why? Because 500 people who saw the workshop told their friends and family, go see it, which is how every hit show in the history of theater was made. This proved to me once and for all that word of mouth is responsible for 90% of sales. Good marketing, advertising, and press can make a great show a little bit more successful. It can't help a mediocre show. It can't make a hit or cause a flop." And I read this and I thought, well, this is not just true for theater. This is probably true for books and for almost every other entertainment medium because word of mouth does seem to drive so much. I'm just wondering, I'm amazed, first of all, that you were able to articulate it with such clarity and certainty. When did this occur to you? How many shows did you have to mount to come to the conclusion that, yes, it really is about word of mouth?
You know, when I was doing Rent, I was 31 years old, and I was a cocky young producer who thought, well, I'm the producer of Rent, and look at how great my marketing is. And, Rent is such a big hit because my marketing and my logo and all the promotion we're doing is so terrific. And I remember some friends of mine had produced that musical Sideshow. Mm-hmm. And it was selling no tickets. And I liked it. It was a
Siamese twins, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Henry Krieger had written the score, the man who wrote
Dreamgirls. Yeah.
So, it was a sweet show and it had some great songs. They can't sell a ticket. And I'm saying to my friend and mentor, Manny Eisenberg, your marketing's all wrong. Let me just change everything and we'll start selling tickets. Now, they don't let me do the marketing. And of course, sadly, they close in a matter of weeks because it has not taken off. And it was my 33-year-old hubris that was like, if you had the right marketing, that show would have taken off. Mm-hmm. And by the way, that show did get a very good review in the New York Times when it opened. And I was wrong. Yeah. That show didn't take off because the audience didn't like it that much.
It didn't move me at all the way Rent did. That's for sure.
Yeah. They didn't like it that much. And that's always the truth. And maybe it took me from Rent all the way to Hamilton to acknowledge that we help to shape the portal through which they see it, but we don't decide if they're going to like it or love it. And it's also because right before I did Hamilton, I did a show I loved called The Last Ship by Sting, written by Brian Yorkey and John Logan, two amazing writers, as well as Sting's beautiful score, directed by Joe Mantello. And it was poetic. It had beauty. And the audience didn't like it. And that was so clear. It was just like I saw it going on in real time. I remember, I mean, one of our jobs as a producer is to be honest with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember once walking out of I'm at the matinee. It's previews. The reviews are not even in yet. And matinee's getting out. It's got the standing ovation. They all get a standing ovation. The people are standing for the performers. It is an act of respect and cheer for the actors who just put themselves out for 2.5 hours. And two middle-aged women are walking out, and one of them says to the other, well, the music was good. And I went, we're dead.
Yeah.
We're dead.
Well, Bonnie Raitt, words of wisdom, right? I can't make you love me. So, Jeffrey, in addition to producing some of the greatest Broadway musicals of our time, most importantly for us at Simon & Schuster, you were also generous enough to help produce this audiobook. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that and why you enjoyed it so much?
Well, a producer must produce. And I had two motivations. One is I thought it would be so entertaining if we could get Broadway actors to play all of the different parts in the book. And two is I didn't want to force the listener to have to listen to me for over 8 hours. I was like, there's just no way I want them listening to me for 8 hours. But what if I read me and then we get Lindsay Mendez and Danny Burstein to play my parents, and we get Andrew Rannells to play Andrew Lippa, and we get Conrad Ricamora to play Kevin McCullum. And it was just such a wonderful thing that all of these friends of mine said, sure, I'll show up to the Simon & Schuster offices and come in and do my part. And hopefully we made something that will keep pricking your ear in all kinds of funny and new ways as you listen to the audiobook.
I mean, it's a big cast you've assembled.
15 actors.
All right.
Amazing group of people.
Well, it's going to be fun to listen to. I'm wondering if I can also just ask you to make this comparison. What it also has is it has a protagonist you care about. And your protagonist, which happens to be you in this case,
yes,
also is quite likable. And I'm wondering, as a producer, when you look at a story on a stage, how important is it for the protagonist to be likable?
Oh, the likability question.
Yes, I want to know.
We could talk about this this is like a class because I'm going to be able to give you so many opposing examples, right? My friend and sometime collaborator, Andrew Lippa, once said, you know what makes a good musical? You love the characters and you love the music. And I think in so many ways, he just reduced it right down to the essence. Mm-hmm. Because I will tell you, Rent gets a little confused in the storytelling, but we love Roger and Mimi.
Mm-hmm.
And right. We really love Angel and Collins. And we adore Maureen and Joanne. And the songs that come out of their mouth are amazing. And I think you could say about, and we love the characters in the chorus line. And we love Miss Hannigan.
Yes, we do.
Even, of course,
even with her drinking issues.
But she's irresistible. Do we love Sweeney Todd? No. Do we love Mama Rose?
I loved her determination. Her tenacity.
Yeah.
I respected Mama Rose.
Yeah. West Side Story is a tougher one because what's amazing about West Side Story is that we're more interested ultimately in the Jets and the Sharks than we are in Tony and Maria.
Yes.
So we like Tony and Maria, but Tony's a sieve. Maria is just a sweet 16-year-old girl, Juliet. Riff and Bernardo are dead. I mean, so who is there to love? But we actually, I think, connect with those members of the gang. So, lovability, and I think if you look at TV, I think Grey's Anatomy has been a 20-something year phenomenon because people have loved those characters, even when they bring in new characters, for over 20 years. So I guess I'm saying, yes, loving them is correlated with success.
Well, so when you were writing the memoir and you were dealing with putting yourself out there, how much did likability factor in the way you presented yourself?
Not at all. It's interesting. What I knew I needed to achieve was every chapter has to be a great scene. Every chapter has to have a beginning, middle, and an end that is satisfying unto itself. And my depiction of me was as stripped down and honest as I could muster. And I was conscious in some scenes of showing my pettiness or my ugliness.
There's some heat in this book. I mean, there's some real anger, especially towards your father.
Yeah.
And, and you can feel it on the page. And the book has layers of self-discovery. One of the chapter titles is "Who is Mark Belanger?"
Yeah, Bellinger.
Oh, Mark Bellinger. Oh, excuse me. Well, Mark Belanger was a shortstop for the Baltimore Orioles in the 1970s, but Mark Bellinger.
It's the same. It's probably the
same
Bellinger.
spelling.
Yeah.
So,
that's interesting.
For the purpose of this interview, who is Mark Bellinger?
Mark Bellinger is the name that my birth mother gave me when I was born, and it was on my original state of Michigan birth certificate that was locked up in a vault for my whole life. And I finally was able to have it unlocked in my early 40s. So Jeffrey Seller is Mark Bellinger.
And you have to read the book to know the rest. But it is quite a discovery. And it is yet another example of the multitudes that you contain and the depth of this really remarkable memoir. And I just want you to know what a pleasure it is to publish you, and I want to congratulate you on the publication of the book, and I know that it is going to influence generations of theater kids.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. What a privilege it is for me to be part of the Simon & Schuster family.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for joining us on The Right Reasons.
With pleasure.